Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Futurecasting, Where Are We Now and How the Workplace is Evolving, presented by Kay Sargent and brought to you by IFMA's Corporate Facilities Council. Please be aware that this webinar is being recorded and you are muted to prevent background noise during the presentation. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them in the questions box, and if time permits, questions at the end of the presentation. I now turn you over to the CFC's Program Committee. Sorry, everybody. I think my Wi-Fi cut out. Did y'all hear my introduction?
We heard some of it.
Parts of it,
Dexter, can you hear me?
not all of it.
Okay.
And we were all
Okay.
panicking thinking it was
My
us. So
my
thank you for making
apologies.
us all feel better and saying it was you. But
It was me. Everybody,
Dexter,
technical difficulty. We're gonna give this a one up. Okay, is everybody ready? We're gonna start over one more time. Y'all ready? Here we go. Hello,
we're
everyone,
ready.
and
We heard
thank
most
you.
of it.
Oh, great! Y'all heard most of it. Well, then
Yes.
I'm gonna
Yeah,
turn
we did.
over
I think we can hand
everybody.
it over to Dexter. We're all just
We're
we're
gonna
all
hand
just
it over.
breathing a sigh of relief because we thought it was us.
No, it was me. We're gonna go ahead and hand it to Dexter, the CFC Programs Committee Chair. We're live, folks. We're live. Dexter.
Thank you, Kylie, for that warm introduction. And thank you, Kay, for being here with us. We want to thank everyone for joining our CFC monthly Wednesday webinar series. I always say, what a way to get the month started. We'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, SenseFix, Tersano, and eStructurer, who help us to bring this amazing content to you on a monthly basis. And we'd also like to give a big shout out to Wayne Weitzel for being a champion for the CFC. And now, without further ado, I'd like to tell you a little bit about who we're speaking with today. Designing with purpose and leading with vision, Kay Sargent has spent 4 decades shaping how people experience the built environment. As Director of Thought Leadership Interiors at the global design firm HOK, she helps organizations from startups to Fortune 500s navigate change through workplace strategy, inclusive design, and real estate innovation. A global advocate for the neuro-inclusive and human-centered environments, Kay has positioned HOK at the forefront of inclusive design. Under her leadership, the firm's work has earned international recognition, including awards from the Green Good Design, IWI, and the Best of Neocon. Her design of the TOCCO hardware line for PBA was honored with both Gold and Innovation Awards in 2024. Kay's influence reaches far beyond project delivery. She has testified before Congress, advises on global wellness leaders through Delos, and serves on the leadership teams of IFMA's Workplace Evolutionaries, Work Design Magazine, and ASID's Research Task Force. As an author and speaker, her work continues to inspire and motivate a more equitable, inclusive, and future-ready workplace for everyone. So without further ado, Kay, take it away.
Thank you very much. That you did not need to read that whole long bio, but I appreciate that you did. So today, what I really want to dive into is a little bit about kind of where we are and what's happening and what we can be expecting. And we're kind of in that moment in history of work where we are nowhere near where we were, but we're also nowhere near where we're going to end up. Great quote by Julia recently that she just kind of shared that. I think that's actually really, really true. And so when we think about the future, there are typically 3 types of people that we all become. So this is where you get to self-identify. You don't have to tell anybody else how you identify, but you get to self-identify as one of these three things. When it comes to the future, we are either people that let it happen, you make it happen, or you wonder, oh my God, what just happened, right? And I'm going to tell you, you do not want to be in that last category. In fact, if you really stop and think about it, no industry should be more focused on future casting than ours. People spend 90% of their time in the built environment. We are responsible for a huge percent of the carbon emissions on the planet, and we build buildings that will stand at a minimum for 70, if not hundreds of years, and design spaces that will be occupied for 10, 20, 30 years. So we have to think about what is coming so that we can truly design spaces that will be ready and fit for purpose. And I will tell you right now, everybody says we want to be future proof. I don't believe in future proof. I want the future to come. The alternative would really be bad. What we want to do is be future ready. And the one thing that we know that is constant today is change. And it is not the strongest that will survive, but it is those that are the most adaptable to that. And that's really what we need to think about. So if you think about it, Netflix didn't kill Blockbuster, late fees did. Apple didn't kill the music industry. Having to buy an entire album when all you wanted was one song did. Airbnb didn't kill the hotel industry. Boring Choices did. Amazon didn't kill other retailers. Bad customer service did. Uber didn't kill the taxi business. Being able to pay when you want it and have somebody come whenever you want them, that actually killed the taxi industry. But what industry do you think has the biggest target on its back right now? Well, it's ours. Co-working started that disruption in the workplace sector, and COVID is really just kind of taken it to the next level. And so we're really truly in this moment of flex. And this could be our Kodak moment as an industry if we don't really seize the opportunity to understand the shifts that are at hand. Now, earlier this year at 2025, we had the weekly average occupancy reach that pre-pandemic level of 54%. Most people think, okay, everybody was fully occupied before. That wasn't really true. People have been working remotely or not necessarily coming into the office every day. And so we actually have gotten back to that pre-pandemic moment. But we're also in this moment where many companies right now are trying to decide, do we go back to what we used to do, or do we go forward? And I equate this moment that we've faced over the last several years as our industry and the way that we have done things is like this big, huge truck going down the road. And between co-working and COVID, we had to take a hard left, but our truck was too big because we aren't nimble enough to shift and to change the way that we need to. And so a lot of people got stuck and they didn't know what to do. And so a lot of them started to back up. But I'm telling you that what you're going back to, the way we used to do it, doesn't really 100% exist anymore. And so for us, we really need to find a way that we can truly go forward and be more positive about that. And so, on that note, welcome to the post-normal times. Everybody says kind of like that new normal. I don't think there's anything normal about this. I think we're in post-normal times where things are constantly going to be changing and shifting, especially with all these things around artificial intelligence and technology and all these other factors that we're dealing with today. And so if we look at this moment right now, some key things that we see where there are some massive economic shifts that are happening that are going to play with cost of relocating, construction costs, all of those things are being adjusted in the trade wars, all of that. There's a big push for getting people to come back in or trying to figure out what that actually is. And that's been going on for 3 years. And everybody keeps saying, okay, when can we stop talking about the return to office? Yet it is still one of the biggest topics that is consuming a lot of our clients today. There's a whole rethinking of social initiatives, what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing, and kind of just recalibrating that as we go forward. There's that adaptive reuse. How do we make use of these existing buildings that may not necessarily be fit to purpose. The vacancy rates are high. There's kind of this flight to quality. People are trying to figure out how do we deal with these outdated buildings. There's also this major focus on authenticity. Okay? People kept talking about experience, and experience is about to become one of the most overused words on the planet. If the experience isn't authentic, then it just doesn't feel real. It feels superficial and people won't stick. So we need to think about that. There's a huge movement towards circularity, meaning how do we repurpose? How do we reuse? How do we rethink things? Because we can't just keep throwing everything away, right? So how do we kind of rethink and embrace this whole notion of circularity? And of course, technology is a huge driver in what we're doing. And a lot of people have kind of held off on artificial intelligence, right? But that ship is leaving the port, and we all need to be on it and understand how that's going to impact our industry. So all of these things are happening now. And I'm going to share some other shifts that people think are happening, but we're going to put a little spin on this. Again, there's a lot of people that are talking about experience. We actually believe that we need to think about what is really true for you and what is that real experience. If I put a slide in a law firm, that might be a great experience at Google, but it may not be so much at a law firm. And so it's about really understanding who are we designing for and being more fit for purpose. Everybody's talking about productivity, right? But quite frankly, we're a lot of knowledge workers and people can produce things. The question right now is what is the value of what you're actually producing? And is it high value or low value? And so the question we should be asking our clients is what activities do you value? And how do we design space to support those activities, really to kind of help people move forward? There's this whole notion of activity-based working that in certain parts of the world have been embraced for over 20 years, but we're starting to evolve that to the next level of environmental-based working, where it's not just about people aren't just choosing where can I work that will fit the activity that I need to do, but where can I go to work that fits the environmental conditions, whether it's temperature or lighting or easier access to things. That's really what we're starting to evolve to as well, and I'll explain a little bit more about that later on. We also talk a lot about sustainability, and if there's a word I could get rid of, I would love to get rid of the sustainability word because that ship has sailed. And I don't think anybody just wants to kind of sustain. We want to thrive. And so we need to kind of go to the next level, and we need to really be thinking about how do we accommodate and adjust for regeneration and give back actually, and or be neutral, carbon neutral, or even carbon positive. Like how do we correct some of the damage that we've already done? And then we also have a lot of people that are so focused on technology and how that's going to impact us that we're missing some of the societal factors that are really pivotal. As a society, we've done a great job actually of predicting technology. Maybe not the timing of it, but we have. Even Dick Tracy had a phone that he talked into 50 years ago. But what we miss is the societal elements. And I think we're missing that right now. And I think what's happening right now is that the office is transforming to be more of a cultural platform. It is not just a place you have to go to work. You can work almost anywhere today. It is becoming a cultural platform for an organization and for groups of people that are coming together. And we need to think about that. But we also need to think about what is on the horizon because we're not building buildings just for today. In fact, if we're focused on today, by the time they even get into it, those spaces could absolutely be dated. And so when we talk about the future, we also need to understand, well which one are we referring to, right? Because there is kind of the three horizon scenario that we look at, which is the now, what's happening in the next 2 years, the seen future, and then the beyond, like the horizon, right? So what is 10 years plus out? There are a lot of people right now that are ideating for 20 years because that might be their lease terms. We have clients that are coming to us and saying 50 years because they're looking at building campuses. The number 2070, that year is kind of a magical year as well in many realms, whether it's the United Nations initiatives or whatever. So we're talking about the immediate, the now, the seen horizon, or the beyond to really focus on. And that funnel widens because the farther out we go, the harder it is to predict because the variables just kind of start piling on top of each other and become really, really difficult. And so we work with a lot of clients that have millions of square feet of space all around the world, and they want to know what's coming. They want to know what they should be doing with their portfolio and what they should be thinking about. And so when we're doing these future casting sessions with our clients, we kind of bucket these issues into 5 big areas that we need to focus on when we're thinking about 5 years and out and really going beyond that. The first is that social economic bucket. What's happening in your specific sector? What's happening culturally? What's happening in the society, whether it's the shifts or the initiatives that we're starting to see? What's happening with the cost of living and the wage gaps? And what's happening with those geopolitical factors? The second bucket that we really need to start thinking about is place. Location strategy, your portfolio strategy, how is that shifting? How is climate change impacting that? Thinking about workplace authenticity, we're thinking about that new urbanism where that central business district evolves into the social business district. We're thinking about that aging infrastructure, that adaptive reuse, and even the commute. In the third bucket, it's really about sustainability. And I know I just said I hate that word, right? But this is really about environmental sustainability and human sustainability. It's about health equities or inequities. It's about our physical, mental, and cognitive well-being. It's about that climate crisis and regeneration, circularity, and also resiliency and where we can and cannot be today just because of all the issues that we're dealing with. Okay, the fourth bucket is people. Who we're actually designing all these spaces for. We have a declining labor force. We need to upskill and retrain. We need to think generationally. We need to think about diversity and equity and inclusion because that is the reality of who we are as a population today. We need to think about the longevity imperative that the young today will most likely be guaranteed to become very, very old because they are going to be living a lot longer. And then we need to think about immigration and migration and those patterns and how that's happening. And then the fifth bucket really is about technology. It's about virtual work, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, immersive technologies, automation, robotics, smart buildings, things that quite frankly, in our industry, we've been dealing with for some time, but these things are on steroids now and are really expanding. So these are the 5 buckets that when we start projecting where are we going to be and how does that going to impact our decisions that we're making today, these are the things that we're thinking as we go forward. So I want to dive into each one of these just real briefly because I could spend hours on each one of these. But just to give you a flavor or a taste of some of the things. So when we start thinking about social economic issues, we start thinking about those silos that people are living in today and the fact that a lot of people that are working either remotely and or some of the initiatives that are happening are creating more and more silos in our society. And siloed organizations tend not to be successful organizations and tend not to be as prosperous. There's a big issue about where we should be working today. There's a huge gap between who can and who cannot work remotely, and even the pay gap that we're starting to see. We also know that staff strategy really needs to drive that real estate strategy, and we've got those changing demographics about what people want and what they're going to be looking for going forward. When we start thinking about places, we start thinking about the fact that 90% of the global building stock today was built prior to 1990 and is outdated by today's sustainability criteria. And we really need to be thinking about how does that happen? Now, the good news is in the United States, it's about 70% because we are a younger country. And in countries where you've got a lot more uh, rapid development that's happening, it may not be as much. But we need to really start digging into what are we going to do with this aging building stock that we have. We need to think about our lives. And a lot of cities now that are going from that central business district to that social business district, they're becoming more walkable cities. We're increasing the bike paths and rethinking the flows and even that concept of that 15-minute city, right? To reduce those commutes and to reduce our carbon impact on the planet. So those things are big issues that we're dealing with. And when we talk about regeneration or sustainability, There's a whole variety of things. There's the materiality that we need to think about. There's the resiliency about where we should or shouldn't be, and the migration patterns that we're starting to see. And then just our overall health and well-being. Our emotional and physical health have taken a hit over the last several years. We have one of the highest rates of burnout, one of the highest rates of teen depression that we've ever had, and everyone is thinking about how do we help people be more engaged and aligned with being more purposeful today. And when it comes to people, one of the things I find fascinating, if you haven't read the book, The Longevity Imperative, it basically says that the likelihood that you're going to live to be 90 or 100 if you are born today is pretty high. And that also means that for someone that is born today, a Stanford study just said that the likelihood is that they will have a 67-year career. Now, just think about that. For me, when I graduated, I thought I'd be working for 30 years. But the reality is, I'll probably be working for 40 or 50 years. And so for our children, unless something radically changes, like universal income, or we really start to intelligently think about how we apply artificial intelligence, the likelihood of them living longer, even well into their hundreds, is very viable. And that means they're going to have to work longer. And so we're also starting to see this massive increase in the inequities between different populations and different groups, and a massive decline in the labor force in the U.S. and in uh, in the UK and in Europe, which is really driving either a wider pool of candidates and or a need to bring other populations in and that immigration, and or to think about how do we offload some of this to artificial intelligence to alleviate some of that labor force decline. For the first time, have more deaths than we have births in this country, and I think we passed that milestone about 5 years ago. So we really need to start thinking about how are we going to go forward. And of course, technology is part of that solution, but it's also part of that challenge. And in the real estate world, we actually have been using this for some time with smart buildings and automation, et cetera. In fact, many people are talking about how the FM facility profession is really going to start changing, because you're not going to be managing facilities as much as you might have been in the past, as more and more of them become automated. And what you might be managing is the community. Because if people aren't coming to your building, if they're not connected, then there's not even a purpose to have that building there. But we also know that in the real estate industry, geolocation, asset management, smart building systems, net zero, like all those things that we're driving towards, it's going to start changing the way that we are doing transactions. And even design is being impacted now by artificial intelligence and the ability to generate lots of different scenarios as we go forward. So technology is absolutely impacting us and will continue to do so. But there's also a pushback, because a lot of parts of the world that are now saying it's too much. And we need to be able to kind of have some parameters around this. And we need to be able to think about, can we disconnect? And how do we really celebrate being human today, and thinking about that more and more? So that funnel, the farther out it goes, the less we know about things, the less control that you have, and the more risk there is, because there are so many variables. So predicting what's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years is a challenge. Predicting what's going to happen in 20, 30, or 40 years is even more so of a challenge. And so in many cases, what we're starting really to see is kind of these scenarios that are starting to develop, where you can start to see their key indicators that will tell you which path we're going down. Okay, so I want to kind of go back to that 5-year outlook of what we might see in 2030 and what's on that horizon. We know that there's a massive societal shift that is happening, that this younger generation, either driven by economic factors, geopolitical, social economic issues, has a different perspective about how they want to live their life and what they are and aren't willing to do. We're going to create a bunch of silos, whether it's silos between nations, silos between workers, silos even in organizations, and that we're going to have to think about how do we break down some of those so that we can connect more purposefully. We need to think about that value. It's not just about productivity, right? People are busy, They might be producing, but the question is, are they producing the right thing and is it of quality? We need to think about what is it that we truly value and refocus around that. That central business district evolving to the social business district, we're well on our way to that. That aging infrastructure is just going to become an increasing issue every single day, and we're going to have to deal with that increasing infrastructure and how do we repurpose a lot of that. We need to think about how are we harnessing technology, because I would argue that right now technology is running us more so than us running technology. And I think more and more of us are feeling this intense burnout and that it's kind of just expanding so quickly that we're not necessarily it's how purposeful it is as we're moving forward. And the other thing is behaviors, right? We need to address behaviors. We've gotten into a lot of really bad behaviors. If you are commuting to the office to sit on a Zoom call all day and multitasking, that's a bad behavior. If you're not using the space as it was intended, that's a bad behavior. And so we need to really be more purposeful and intentional about how we go forward. And when we go 5 years beyond that to 2030 and beyond, then I can't even imagine the impact of artificial intelligence in 10 years. I think most people will say that for the next 5 years, it's going to be really exciting, maybe a little overwhelming, but exciting. After that, kind of all bets are off, right? Like we kind of have one shot to train artificial intelligence, to like parent artificial intelligence to be more responsible and do the right thing. After that, it will start training itself. It will start running itself. And so really thinking about that longevity of how artificial intelligence is going to impact us. And it could go a lot of ways. It could actually help alleviate work, or it could just pile on more work for us. And who will determine that is us. Are we giving something back to society, or are we leveraging this just to rack up corporate profits? And I think there's some very pivotal moments where we have some decisions that we're going to have to make as we go forward. That labor decline is going to become a bigger and bigger issue as more and more people retire and as immigration and or the lack of that is starting to impact countries more and more. That longevity imperative. If you're going to work for 60 or 70 years, that changes everything. You're not waiting for retirement to do things. You're going to want to take a year off now or 2 or 3 years. You might need to break that up and have sabbaticals. You might not need to rethink how you take care of yourself financially and physically so that you can even survive. And if you're in certain professions, there are some professions you can't do for 70 years. It's hard to be a construction worker physically in your 70s and 80s, right? And so just thinking about how do we reframe work for this likelihood that we are going to be living longer and hence working longer. And that changes a lot of things. And that actually explains a lot of the attitudes that the younger generation might have now about what they're willing and not willing to do. We also need to think about regeneration. Again, sustainability, the ability to sustain has gone. We need to be at a point where we are giving back and are correcting some of the damage that we have done to really kind of preserve as we go forward. We need to think about structured reskilling. The days of, going to 4 years of university, maybe getting a master's degree, and then working, for the rest of your life are done. Our children are going to end their careers in jobs that don't even exist today. They are going to have to go back and get upskilled and reskilled to stay current. And so we have to think of a way that they can do that in a palatable way, not just, going to night school or on their weekends, whether it's built-in educational sabbaticals, etc. And that's the only way we're going to keep the labor force really up to speed and relevant today also. We need to think about intentional time. Are you really spending your day doing what you value, or are you just responding to email and you're in triage mode all day long, right? And so we need to think about where is the best place to do those things and what should I actually be doing and how I should be spending my time. And then, of course, with all of this increase in technology and access, and a lot of people saying that privacy is no longer, readiness and security are top of mind for many, many companies today because they need to think about how they are going to be prepared either for the next hurricane or climate change and the impact of that, because the buildings we are building today will be around when all of these things are starting to impact us more severely. And so again, we really start thinking about those different scenarios. And there's some wild cards here, right? You've kind of got those black swans. Those are things that just come out of nowhere. They're totally unpredictable, and you can't guess it, whether it's a pandemic or potentially maybe a war. You think about those gray rhinos. Okay, gray rhinos are things that we know that are right in front of us, but we just don't know how to handle it, so we're just ignoring it. That's the commute. That's the fact that a lot of people don't want to come in because they got used to working in their own time slots and having flexible hours. That's the societal shifts that we're starting to see, and climate crisis that we know all of those things are issues that we have to deal with, but most people are like, let's just ignore that because we don't know how to deal with that right now. And then you've got the wild cards, those random disruptors, whether it's a natural disaster, whether it's a recession, whether it's some crazy innovation or advancement that just comes out of nowhere. I mean, 3 or 4 years ago, we were talking about the metaverse, not really that much about artificial intelligence. That has totally flipped in the last few years and has been a little bit of a wild card because even though it's been around for a long time, when it would really kind of start becoming significantly more impactful wasn't necessarily known. But that has happened in the last few years. So these are all things that we know are going to happen. We just don't necessarily know what or when that we have to factor in. And so let's just quickly talk about technology. AI will not replace humans, but a human with artificial intelligence will likely replace a human without it. And that is probably the reality that we are living in today. And data is the new oil, but we need to make sure that it's refined and that it's good. It's only good if it's clean. And so a lot of people are collecting a lot of information that, quite frankly, is not necessarily well vetted and could lead us down the wrong path. And not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. We need to make sure that we are collecting the right information. We've got all these sensors now, and quite frankly, they're giving us so much information that a lot of companies don't even know what to do with that. So we have to be intentional about what is it that we care about and how do we focus in on that. Because as we know, garbage in is garbage out. And that fast data often leads to thin data, meaning it's not well vetted. And what we need to do is triangulate and say, well, why? Why is nobody using that? Or why is nobody coming in to really understand the dynamics behind that? And if just the perfect example of this is there's so many times we're called to a site because people will say we don't have enough conference rooms. But when we walk through with the facility manager and the real estate team, there's plenty of open spaces. Or they're maybe being misused by one person sitting in a 10-person conference room. You've got a booking problem, not a conference room problem. And maybe you just don't have the right kinds of conference rooms. And so if I just look at the booking, I could lead to the assumption that I need to add a bunch of conference rooms when that, quite frankly, isn't really the right solution at hand. So we also need to make sure that we're getting good data and that it's accurate and that we're really assessing what matters. And data plus context equals information. We need to make sure that we're putting it into the right parameters. If nobody's using something, but it's because it doesn't have power or it's in the wrong location, then that tells us really truly what we need to know. And information and seasoning or expert intelligence equals knowledge. Inviting the right people that really understand what's happening. And I'm going to argue that far too often, the facility managers who really understand what's happening in the space and how it's being used are not part of the equation, that are taking those outputs that they're getting and saying, okay, what does that actually really mean? And how do we make use of that in an intelligent way going forward? So we need to be a lot smarter about that. Because what's happening right now is we're living in a digital debt. We have this just amazing information, this inflow of data, emails, team chats, notifications coming at us nonstop. And 68% of people say it's just too much, that they start to turn it out. They can't read those long emails. They turn things off. They're ignoring things because it's overwhelming them. And this is what I mean by technology is running us, not us running technology. We have to be smarter about how we do this. And so many people talk about noise being the issue today. when in fact most disruptions are actually caused by technology. That constant popping or that constant pinging or the number of times that we're checking our email box, right? It's literally we are playing email triage almost every single day. And in many cases, being on these Zoom calls is absolutely overwhelming for individuals, especially anybody that might be neurodivergent and not be able to take so many people, kind of feeling like everybody is staring at you at that given moment. And a lot of the spaces that we're creating in the metaverse or virtually are just this assault of information that is coming at us. There are no rules. It's like the Wild West in the virtual realm right now. And we need to think about how do we apply some rules to actually make it so that we can address kind of the real issues, right? And I think one of the problems right now is that we're living with paleontologic emotions. We have medieval institutions, but we have godlike technology that we're using, and everything is out of sync. And we need to really kind of get it back to that notion of having some balance and control. And so that means that the spaces that we're creating, we need to think about what we as humans can actually handle, either auditorily or visually or just even being in those spaces. Most people can't even go into the metaverse without just feeling overwhelmed and even almost physically nauseous because it's kind of that Wild West. And so some of those rules that we apply to how we build environments need to start being applied to that virtual realm as well. And our mindfulness is being impacted by this. Before COVID, our attention span was 2.5 minutes. That's already pretty low. But during the pandemic, it dropped to less than a minute. If I can't read something in less than 1 minute, I'm just going to okay, triage that, put it over, I'll come back to that later. And we need to be able to get to a point where we actually can be a little bit more mindful, because we're just kind of staying in the shallows of our mind. We're not getting into that deep, meaningful thought anymore. We're not racking our brains. We're just Googling something instantly so that we can have it. And we need to be able to build in moments where we can just be thoughtful, kind of refresh, and be intentional. And so I think most of us would agree we'd like to spend our time better. But a lot of people right now are spending a huge percentage of their time not necessarily on the culture or the interactive work, but on administrative work. And so here's the thing, if artificial intelligence can help us there, that frees up time for us to be able to spend more time doing things that we want to do. Or maybe it frees up our time so that we can have a brand new renaissance, right? We can focus on arts and culture or more meaningful work or those things that are important to us. So we need to start thinking about how do we not just work faster, how do we work smarter? And again, this is impacting our industry specifically in a variety of ways. And almost everybody on this call has been using artificial intelligence for some time in their building automation system. So we've already embraced this and already seen how it can help us out as we go forward. But our future is a race between the growing power of that technology and the wisdom in which we choose to use it. Great quote from Stephen Hawking, and I love that. And I really truly hope that we are intentionally using this in the right way, not just racing forward. But what's happening right now is the auto industry is kicking our butt. You can get into a car, it automatically unlocks, everything is preset for you, the lighting, the steering column, the music, the temperature, all of those things, because the fob in your pocket tells you. But you get to the office, we're still crawling around on the floor trying to find an outlet. We have not leveraged technology in the workplace nearly to the same level that we have in other places, and that needs to change. Because right now, a lot of people view this as the future of work, right? Very computer oriented, very high tech. This is what you're going to see in all the hi-fi or the sci-fi movies that we see out there. And this is a great scene from Passenger, the movie that came out. But at the end of the day, we embrace this notion that high tech equals high touch. That we as humans, we don't relate to this. This isn't organic. This isn't natural, right? It's kind of cool and funky, but it's just very cold and sterile. That we as humans actually really like spaces that we feel more connected to. And right now, what's happening in many of these spaces is we're being overwhelmed with sensory stimulation. We are being bombarded with lighting, temperature, sound, all of these things. And we're all sitting here kind of sensory gating. And so there's a growing awareness around individuals that are either hypersensitive, they're being overwhelmed and they can't handle that and they need to have more controlled spaces, or people that are hyposensitive. They actually lean into that. They actually need more. They need to move or fidget. They need richer, saturated colors. They might need to listen to music when they're working. And so we have to be able to create spaces that address who we are as humans. And we are all neurodistinct. In fact, we are all neurodiverse. We are not all neurodivergent, though. And what might be annoying to someone that's neurotypical can be debilitating to someone that's neurodivergent because those sensory distractions, sound, smell, clutter, that leads to cognitive distractions, loss of focus, discomfort, and that leads to a loss of engagement or productivity. And I don't know a single company right now that isn't trying to address that. Everybody is trying to figure out, how do I reduce stress and burnout and improve satisfaction and engagement and productivity. And a lot of those things are being impacted by the sensory elements in the space. It's too hot, it's too noisy, it's too loud, I'm getting distracted, there's visual clutter, all of those things. And so we have to fundamentally start thinking about the elements and the principles of design and creating spaces that address sensory processing and cognitive well-being to maximize performance for every single one of us. And one of that is how we design space. I'd actually argue that activity-based working, this notion of you get to choose where you sit based on your activity, is great in concept, and we need options and choices. But most people are choosing where to sit based on the environment, closer to the window or farther away, in a warmer spot versus a cooler spot, in a louder area versus a quieter area, in a busier area versus a more isolated space. When we have the choice and we can choose those settings, then we can actually really find those spaces that fit us well, and we can be much more productive. And in many cases, one of the reasons people like working from home is that they probably have more control over those environmental elements that for many of us in the office just feel like, okay, I've been assigned this desk, I can't control anything. I can't control the lighting, I can't control the sound, I can't control anything, and we're just sitting there being totally overwhelmed by that. And so we need to really lean into this creating human-centric spaces. So what does that mean? How do we create commute-worthy spaces that are more human-centric in nature? I'm going to give you a few things to think about. One, amenities are nice. It's not the end-all be-all, but the number one amenity is people. You could have an amazing coffee bar or an amazing conference center, but if nobody's there, then it just doesn't feel right. And access to leaders is absolutely key today. Coffee, I don't know, coffee is important. I'm not going to pretend that it's not. Coffee and services. What can I get at the office that I can't get at home? Is it, somebody who can make me that specialty cup of coffee, or is it the tech bar or whatever? We need to think about providing people those services they can't get. We need to think about mentoring and professional development and access to leaders. But that only works when leaders are there and when they're accessible. So creating spaces that are designed to support that is important. We need to think about a sense of belonging and tying people to something bigger than themselves. If you're waking up in the morning and thinking, do I want to put on pants and drive to the office today? Right? Like, that's the wrong thing. We need to be thinking about what your office is doing, what your purpose and your mission is, and how can you do that, and where can I do that, and really kind of feeling like you're part of something today is important for people. We need to think about that mission, that culture, that purpose. So this is a great example of a scientific workplace that used to have all the administrative people in one spot, and all the lab people in another building. But in a sense, what we did here is we created a common atrium with labs on one side, admin on the other. And all the people in the labs can look across to see the admin people and say, wow, all those people are here to support me and my work. Better get busy, right? And all the admin people can look across and see people in the labs and say, I'm helping to cure cancer. That's the mission of this organization, and I am connected to that. And so, again, connecting people to something meaningful that they have pride in and they have a purpose is critical today. Creating spaces that are enticing, that give you something you can't get someplace else or are authentic to who you want to be. That lifestyle studios notion that there are a lot of people that got into some cool things when they were working remotely, whether it was wood shopping or cooking or plants, and going to the office makes you feel like you have to leave that behind. But the office could actually be a place where you can take that one step further, right? Whether it's creating music rooms or podcast areas, libraries for people to share who have book clubs, cooking classes, gardening. We opened up our model shops for a lot of the people in our team who had gotten into crafting or carpentry over the pandemic, and we have this amazing equipment that nobody could use, and now they can. And so Wednesday nights when that space is open, it's like this whole community of people go in there, and it gives them a purpose to come to the office and a connection to each other that kind of just is building this amazing community. We need to think about how we're using technology intelligently to support the activities and designing better gathering spaces. We shouldn't just be shoving the largest rectangular table in every room with the maximum number of chairs and calling it a day. If you're to create or innovate, then create spaces that enable that and support that. We need to create more access to natural outdoor spaces and blur the inside and the out. We need to think about how are we designing for health and well-being, and maybe providing classes or equipment that people don't have at home that encourages them to want to participate. We need to think about if it's fit for purpose and really understand that people are doing a mixture of maybe heads down concentrative work and gathering. You're not only coming to do one or the other, it's probably a little bit of both. And so really thinking about designing spaces that support that. That whole notion of high tech equals high touch, and infusing spaces with more organic materials, things that are more human centric, things that are more natural, that we as people can relate to, and really addressing that sensory processing so that not just people that are neurodivergent, but all of us can really truly be more successful and can find spaces that address the level of cognitive support that we actually need in sensory controls. And of course, we've just come out with a book about 4 or 5 months ago that really addresses that we've been going on a tour and sharing, and always happy to share more on that topic as well. And then, of course, that environmental based working. Enable people to find. If you want to sit in a warmer area that's a little bit darker and a little bit quieter, you should be able to find that spot in the office. And this is happening naturally in any building at any given time, right? But what we need to do is tap into those sensors and feed that information to individuals so they can make better and smarter choices. And so the real question is, are you going to be the type of person that lets it happen, that makes it happen, or wonders what happened? There is a lot of change in our industry right now, and it's not going to slow down. We have to embrace that. We have to lean into it, and we have to really understand not just what's happening now, but what is on the horizon and beyond, so that we can proactively start to create spaces that we think are what we want. Because if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. And for our industry, that is not an option. And so the question is, are you ready? Are you ready for the future? Are you embracing this forward-thinking notion of trying to understand what is coming? Because we are no longer just designing environments. We're designing the entire experience. And that is an experience, not just for today, but for tomorrow and beyond. So with that, I'm going to share this one last thing with you. Just that's the book that we just put out about designing neuro-inclusive workspaces. And of course, I am always happy to connect with the IFMA community and to share our thoughts. And I'm going to stop sharing so we can maybe see some faces and maybe have some questions from the audience.
Um, Kay, first off, wow, that was so informative and so incredible. Um, Type your questions in the questions box, everybody, for Kay, if you have any. As people are typing, I just want to say the funniest reaction I had as you were speaking when you said that people born today are gonna live until they're 90 or 100. I was like, yes, I'm young. Maybe I'm a part of that. I'm gonna live for so long. And then you said that we're gonna work till we're 70 or 80, and I was like, oh, okay. That's
Mm,
okay. I think over the 50 minutes, I think I've come to terms with the fact that I'll be working that long. I'm okay with working for IFMA for that long. That's okay with me.
mm,
I'm
okay.
glad I
All
know
right.
now.
So here's the reality of that. They say that the first person that could be alive to 150 is on the planet today, and that you're not going to work until you're 60 or 70 because most of us are already doing that. Your career could be 67 years. Because if you're
Okay.
going to live into to your 100 with the things the way that they're going, you can't retire when you're 60, right? You just can't. I mean,
Yeah.
the math doesn't add up unless universal income kicks in, or here's what I love, right? So just thought, almost 100 years ago this week, Henry Ford did something that I think it's time that we embrace it. Okay. So if anybody's watching the Gilded Age right now, highly recommend it. Fabulous, right? So, in the last Gilded Age, late 1800s, people were working like 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. They were working long, hard hours, and there were massive labor riots, and there was like this big, dichotomy and those big silos within society. The rich were really rich, and the poor were, really suffering. And when Henry Ford invented the assembly line, he basically invented also, he decided to go to that 5-day work week. And people thought he was crazy. He's like, what are you doing? But he was like, I have to give something back. Like, this is going to improve productivity.
Mhm.
And, we're already making a ton of money, right? And I want people to be able to drive, right? So let's, let's give something back to society rather than just ratcheting up corporate profits.
Mhm.
We are still in that 5-day work week. When they invented the computer, they predicted by the year 2000, we would only have to work 2 or 3 days a week because of the increase in productivity that computer would give us. But the opposite happened because we didn't have a Henry Ford who said, I'm going to invest in society versus ratcheting up corporate profits. Now we're at a point where we have artificial intelligence.
Mhm.
Artificial intelligence could make us all more productive. So the question is, are we just going to ratchet up corporate profits and drive the wedge between, the rich and the poor and the haves and the have-nots even wider? Or are we going to give something back to society? Could we basically say, all right, let's go to a 4-day work week so that people actually have time to have a little bit more balance in their life? Because when you're waiting 30 years and, oh, we'll go travel when when we retire when we're in our 60s. But if you don't have any idea of what the back end of your career is going to be or how long that's going to be, that changes everything.
Mhm.
You're much more likely to say, you know what? I'm going to take a year off now and I'm going to travel now, right? And so we need to rethink how we move forward and how we leverage artificial intelligence, not just to the benefit of the economy, but to the benefit of society.
Wow. Thank you, Henry Ford. And that's very
Well,
insightful.
he didn't do everything
Well,
great. There
True.
are plenty
You're
of
right.
things you
You're
could
right.
be
You're
mad
right.
at him about too, but
You're
we
right.
will celebrate him this week for that one thing that he did.
I'll celebrate that, and I'm gonna say it here first. I'm gonna be the first person that's 150 years old.
You
We're gonna make it happen.
you,
See ya.
you
good
go
good
for it.
luck. Good luck to you, Kylie. Good
Thank
luck
you.
to you. Do we have any questions popping through?
Right now,
Kylie.
we have a wonderful compliment from Tina that says, excellent presentation. Thank you. And thank you, Tina, for sending that.
Tina, a little bit of a fire hose at you, and I apologize. I know I shared a lot of information really, really quickly, but I think you guys can hang with it. And Kylie, I'm going to say, I promise you, I will not be the first person to live to be 150 because I have 5 children, and death is my retirement plan, and some days that can't come fast enough for me.
Well, but also maybe we don't. Maybe not everybody wants to live till they're
Yeah.
150. That's something to think about too.
My body isn't even going to make it to 70, let alone 150. So that's what you need. That's the thing. It change if you're going to live that long. Here's the thing. It changes everything. You have to
No,
fundamentally think about taking care of yourself
it's true.
because you can't wait until you're 50 or 60 and work like we are today. Your body is just going to it's not going to hold up. And so you
You're
have
right.
to think about what do I need to do to physically sustain and to mentally sustain and how do I build my social network? I mean, we're living in a time of an amazing increase in isolation and people
Mhm.
feeling lonely. And that does not bode well if you're going to be living longer and longer. So you need to start building relationships. We need to rethink how we even are living, right? Golden girls, right? That's going to become far more of the reality of people who are maybe they don't have children. And here's the other thing that's fascinating. We also have a whole group of individuals now that aren't having kids.
Mhm.
And when you have a workforce that does not have children, that changes things, right? They have different priorities. They might be able to move. A lot of parents don't want to move because their kids are in school or everything is cycled around the school year, right? Or, their time, etc. When you have a more nomadic workforce, they can be more nimble.
It's very true.
But they could also be like, I'm out of here tomorrow because I don't have to worry about, how am I, taking care of my family, etc. And so it changes the game about just who the workforce is and what their priorities are. I think we really are going to we haven't rethought work in a long time.
Mhm.
And I think fundamentally, we need to rethink the societal issues and work. We need to rethink people. And that will determine what the workforce and our cities should look like. If you're starting saying, what should the workplace look like, but you're not thinking about those other issues,
Mhm.
you're missing the point altogether. We have to think about those other things first because those are going to be the driver for the real estate outcomes.
Okay, I want to ask you one last question, then we do have to wrap up. We only have 3 more minutes. What role do you see IFMA playing, right, in the future of work?
Um, that's huge, and I would love to cite my entire congressional testimony, but I will say this. Buildings are a huge part of infrastructure in this country. Again, we spend 90% of our time inside. When we think about the infrastructure bill and some of those things, it is our buildings. And we have an aging infrastructure. We have not maintained it as much as we should have over the years, and it is being repurposed and reimagined right now. And U.S. cities, almost every city west of the Mississippi was designed as a central business district with people living in the suburbs. We are fundamentally different than Europe that was evolved over decades. And so it is no wonder why we haven't had the same return to work they have in other parts of the world. But we need to reimagine our cities, and we need to stop building buildings that are silos. And facility managers have a critical role in sustainability, in resiliency, in being future ready, and in realizing that the more and more artificial intelligence and technology is managing our buildings or running these buildings, it frees you up to focus on the tenants
Mm.
and the occupants and creating amazing experiences so that they even want to be there. And so I think we are starting to go from facility management to people management, right? Like it is more and more focused around how are we creating amazing experiences for the people that are here? What do they need? What do they want? How do we service them better?
Okay,
I
we
think
have
that's
one
where the
more question. I agree.
uh,
One more question for you to answer. I'm going to give you 20 seconds, then I'm going to plug a CFC webinar we have next week, and then Dexter's going to close us out. 20 seconds, Kay. Here's a question from Colleen. She said, great presentation, thank you. If we move to a 4-day work week, why would employers want to pay us a full salary if we're only working 4 days a week?
Because you're getting as much done in the 4 days and you're not burning out, and you're probably going to be as effective and happier and more engaged when you actually are there.
Wonderful.
Perfect, solid answer. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Cheryl, to answer your question, everybody's going to get the recording of this to their inbox tomorrow. So if you want to watch it again, watch your favorite part again, think about living till 100, you can do that tomorrow with the recording in your inbox. Really quickly, I want to plug another CFC webinar happening next week. I just dropped in the chat the registration link. CFC has a LATAM lighthouse. One of our visions and missions is growing our LATAM membership and providing content in Spanish for IFMA members in Latin American countries. Through that, we are having a monthly Spanish speaking webinar, and it is happening next week. So if you are Spanish speaking, if you have colleagues that are Spanish speaking, even if they are not an IFMA member, have them register. Even if they can't attend live, they'll get their recording to their inbox the day after. And that webinar is happening a week from today on August 13th. Dexter, we're ready for you to close us.
I just want to say a special thank you to Kay. Thank you so much for giving us this
Always happy
wonderful
to.
information. This has been a wonderful webinar. And so folks, Kay, I don't know if you'd be able to put up your last slide where folks can see your information. I do, or if Kylie can help you. I want folks to be able to reach out to you, get information, learn about that wonderful book that you've written on neurodivergency. A must read for everyone. And so once again, thank you. And we look forward to our monthly webinar next month. And so thank you everyone for coming. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye-bye now.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for coming.